Hello, I'm Jen. Welcome back to my channel, Literary Love 123, where I read, analyze, and discuss horror through a literary lens. Today's video is a spring personal curriculum checkup. So we will be discussing what's working, what's not working, my successes, and my failures so far on my personal curriculum journey. So, after this quick intro, I will be right back. And yes, we will be talking about horror through a literary lens. My spring 2026 personal curriculum includes 3 courses. 2 of the courses I made myself. The third is a course available online through edX, and it is a Harvard course titled Introduction to Shakespeare, Hamlet's Ghost. I'm going to start with the Hamlet course first for a couple of reasons. One, because it is a course that was already designed and available online. So all I'm doing is completing assignments for this particular course. And it is the one that I am struggling the most with prioritizing. It is not that I'm not enjoying it, but in grad school, I did have a course on Shakespeare and I definitely enjoyed it, which is why I wanted to get back into it. But I find I am a little resistant to somebody else outlining a course for me. After years of that being the case in grad school, I feel like there's kind of a rebellious side of me where I'm pushing back against it. But I do want to talk about some of the things that I have taken note of so far in my reread of Hamlet. So, because of course this is titled Shakespeare's, like an introduction to Shakespeare, Hamlet's Ghost, we are clearly focusing predominantly on the ghost in Shakespeare. Now, I will say I have learned several new things, or maybe not necessarily learned several new things, but learned to think about different manifestations of the ghost. What is the ghost? Who is the ghost? Previously, I had read it straightforward as the ghost is actually the ghost of Hamlet's father, and everything is what it seems on the surface, that he is coming to have Hamlet avenge his murder. But in thinking through things with this course and chatting online with other people who are taking this course, there are a few different ways to look at what this ghost represents. And there's textual evidence for those things. So I just want to talk a little bit about one of the aspects of the ghost before I get into what this ghost could actually represent. So, something I had never really thought about before is that the ghost refuses to answer anyone else except Hamlet. He appears first to Hamlet's friends or, servants, things like that, and they admonish the ghost. They ask the ghost to speak to them, and the ghost refuses. And finally, when the ghost encounters Hamlet, that's when the ghost speaks. So I thought that was interesting also, because others can see this ghost, but he won't speak to anyone but Hamlet. And then I want to talk a little bit now about the different possibilities for what the ghost is. So, one of the things that the ghost appears as is an omen or a portent. When Horatio is speaking about the appearance of the ghost, he says, "This bodes some strange eruption to our state." So, he sees this ghost as something that is giving them a bad omen. There's trouble, right? Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. And it's also important to note that Horatio is a skeptic, but even the skeptic himself sees the ghost. So I don't really see how some people think that the ghost is merely a manifestation of Hamlet's own psyche, because others do see him. But I would be interested in talking about that. That's also related to another question in another one of my courses that I'll give you a little heads up for. But one of my courses is a deep dive into David Lynch, and I have Spoilers if you haven't watched Twin Peaks. But I have similar questions about Bob in Twin Peaks as to whether Bob could simply be a manifestation of Laura, or if that's possible, how are these other people seeing Bob? But we won't talk about that yet. We'll save that for when I get to that particular course. So back to Hamlet's ghost. So another one, or another aspect of Hamlet's ghost, it could possibly be that this ghost is not only an omen, but a harbinger. And this is again a quote from our resident skeptic Horatio. He says, even like the precurse of feared events, as harbingers preceding still the fates and prologue to the omen coming on, have heaven and earth together demonstrated unto our climatures and countrymen. So he's saying, hey, you know what? This is a harbinger. This ghost is a harbinger. We've known of harbingers before, who appear to warn someone of impending doom. You know, it's kind of a funny reference, but think about Friday the 13th movies. You have Ralph, or that old man and one of them lying in the road, right, who is the harbinger. Don't go there, kids. You're going to get killed if you go there. We have a lot of different harbingers across the horror genre. And so finally, I want to talk about the most literal representation of the ghost, and that is merely that this ghost is Hamlet's father, appearing to him to have him avenge his death. And there are questions that arise. Is this really, though, a ghost that's Hamlet's father? Or is this some sinister spirit there to cause strife in Hamlet's life and to bring about Hamlet's issues? Spoiler, things don't go well for Hamlet. But, the thing there is Hamlet sees the ghost as merely something to trust, right? He says it is an honest ghost. Now, how does Hamlet know this? Is this what Hamlet says? Is this what he believes because that's what he wants to believe, that this is the ghost of his father? Because he is grieving. He's grieving the loss of his father. So he can still have a connection to his father. And he wants to believe that this ghost is truly his father and that this ghost is honest. And so it's just fascinating to me to dig deeper into the idea of the ghost. But as I said, this course, oh no, I dropped something. The Hamlet course has been the one that I've put on the back burner the most. But now, talking about it with you all, I'm ready to move it to one of those front burners soon. So the second course I want to talk about, and give me a moment because that's what I just dropped on my floor. I'm back to talk about course number 2, which is the Gothic Anthropocene. And I'm using mainly this book, Dark Scenes from Damaged Earth, the Gothic Anthropocene, which is edited by Justin D. Edwards, Rune Groland, and Johan Hogland. My objective for this course is to analyze the relationship between the Anthropocene and the Gothic. And if you want to know more about my schedule and more about exactly what the Anthropocene is, then I will link my personal curriculum video when I introduced my spring semester. I will link that in the description box below so you can get that information there. So my schedule had me reading 2 essays per week, and I have been neglecting this course somewhat too in favor of my third course that I'm saving the best for last. But I have read a couple of essays here, and I do have until the end of May. And again, this is just for my personal fulfillment. So if I have to extend this course past May, that's fine. I am doing this for the pure joy and fun. So let me talk a little bit about some of the aspects that I have found particularly noteworthy. So the first concept that I want to talk about comes from an essay by Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock. And the title of this essay is The Anthropocene. But as you can see, the word Anthropocene here is struck through. So you'll kind of find out why that is when I talk more about some of the elements of this essay that really grab my attention. So he writes, the Anthropocene is doubly haunted. First, by the nagging suspicion that we, anthropos, are not quite the masters of the planet the name Anthropocene suggests. And second, as a consequence of ignorance and recklessness, we are sowing the seeds of our own destruction. So that reminded me of the concept of hauntology in the sense that we now, in what some call the Anthropocene geological era, we are haunted by the past and the actions of humans in the past, but we continue those same damaging actions that harm our environment. So we are haunting our own future. We are being reckless now, and we're going to face those consequences in the future. So it's like we're at this present time. Past actions are affecting us now. What we're doing now is going to affect the future. And it's this cycle. And another thing he talks about is that the Anthropocene calls into question not just its own persistence, but indeed its very existence. The name should perhaps more fittingly be rendered under erasure, like he writes it, Anthropocene, and cross through the word Anthropocene, because we are here. However, are we really in charge of what's happening? So when we talk about this particular aspect, another comment he made is something I want to discuss too, as an entity out of place and time, as something from the past that emerges into the present. The phantom calls into question the linearity of history. And he does refer to Jacques Derrida's Spectres of Marx, which is where the concept of hauntology is introduced. We are not necessarily in a linear cycle. Time is not necessarily linear. And I will be talking about that also in a little while when I start talking about my deep dive into David Lynch. So there has certainly been a surprising element of synchronicity in my choices for personal curriculum that I would not have necessarily seen as overlapping. However, now that I see it, I cannot unsee it. And then he talks about the weird. In terms of what I see this as, I feel like he's speaking about the uncanny, because he writes that the weird is associated with a sense of wrongness, the conviction that this does not belong. The weird, or uncanny as I would see it, is marked by the eruption into this world of something from the outside. The eerie, or uncanny, in contrast, is marked either by a failure of absence or by a failure of presence. So something seems off because something's missing that should be there, or something seems off because something is present that should not be there. And I'm trying to see if there was anything else I particularly wanted to talk about. One more thing. Traditional temporal categories collapse as today's human beings become aware of past, present, and future extinctions. Not just aware, but haunted by their present and future memories. The resultant condition is akin to what Paul K. St. Armour, in the context of nuclear anxiety, describes as an inverted or preposterous phenomenon of traumatic symptoms. This next part had my brain ping, 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 that exists not in the wake of a past event, but in the shadow of a future one. With the difference being that this inverted trauma adds to the trauma caused by the accumulation of species extinctions caused by anthropogenic activities in the last 10,000 plus years. What really stuck out to me is being haunted by a future event, living under a shadow of what's coming in the future. So the future is haunting us. Our past is haunting us, and we're being haunted by both in the present. That makes my brain go on a loop, loop, loop cycle for sure. So, okay. Let me get a sip of coffee before we talk about my third course. I hope you're still hanging with me because I don't even know if I'm hanging with myself right now, but let's go. So, my third course that has taken up obviously the majority of my time, mind, life, my whole existence is my deep dive into David Lynch. So, my objective for this course was to expand my knowledge of David Lynch's creative philosophy and explore his creations. Whew. This is a trip. I am still on this trip. I feel like I'm going to be on this trip for the rest of my life. Has there ever been a time where I wasn't familiar with David Lynch? Yes. Yes. So, a little bit about my relationship with David Lynch. I admittedly did not watch any of his work until he passed away last year. I know, bad on me, right? Anyway, when he passed away and people started sharing videos, not only of his work, but of him talking about why he does certain things, where he catches his ideas, right? I became fascinated and I said, well, I've got to get into this. So last year I did watch the first 2 seasons of Twin Peaks. The original, airing was only 2 seasons. I watched that, and I watched Fire Walk with Me, and I enjoyed both. It's kind of sick in a way, I guess, to say I enjoyed Fire Walk with Me. Maybe I endured it to one degree. However, it struck a chord within me for reasons I'll talk about in just a few minutes. But after that, I said, okay, that's great. I'm gonna move on. I know The Return is out there. I know I've got to watch some David Lynch movies, but I'm going to save those for another time. So I decided this spring was time for me to watch Twin Peaks: The Return, which came out in 2017. I have finished it. I'll talk about it in a minute. I have also this course so far watched Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, and Eraserhead. Coming up for me to watch next is Wild at Heart, then Lost Highway, and then Inland Empire. I want to park right now a little bit on The Return. I don't even know how I can really talk about it. It definitely has that element of hauntology sort of in your face because it opens up with a character saying, is it future or is it past? And The Return is, I don't even know how to describe it, but it has embedded itself within me, especially the story of Laura. Even though there are a lot of other aspects that we would have to really sit down and take a long time to talk about with The Return. But I do find myself continually haunted by Laura Palmer's story. And The Return, I'm going to get emotional. It's got a lot to say about identity and history and time and place and creation and destruction and grief and joy. And it calls into question what it means to exist, what it means to exist in a world with both incredible grief, horrifying trauma and abuse and violence, but also joy and light and love, and what happens when those two sides collide. and I'm trying to synopsize this the best way I can. And it is difficult, but I have a lot more to say, not only about the return, but especially about Laura Palmer. So I want to switch now to talk about Laura. So I did also read The Secret History of Twin Peaks by Mark Frost, who is the co-creator of Twin Peaks along with David Lynch. So Mark Frost wrote The Secret History of Twin Peaks. He also wrote The Final Dossier, which I'm going to be reading very soon. But The Secret History of Twin Peaks to me is like a Tolkien version of how Twin Peaks came to be. It's backstories on the citizens of Twin Peaks and connects to indigenous people of the area and the harm that they suffered. It connects to nuclear testing, which is also a big part of the return. It connects to President Nixon. I mean, it's got these elements that tie to actual historical events, but then it's also got that cosmic, otherworldly element. So I was fascinated by The Secret History of Twin Peaks. And I look forward to the final dossier. But now, again, back to Laura. So when you watch The Return, you see more of Sarah Palmer's story. Sarah, of course, is Laura's mother. And something happened to her in the past that affects who she is once we first come to meet her in Twin Peaks, and possibly explains why she reacted or didn't react to what was happening to Laura. Not that there's ever going to be an excuse or any way to say, oh, it's okay that you didn't react and didn't do what you should have done. But it's this complex exploration of what happened to her and then how that affected Laura. And Laura, again, she haunts me. And I know I'm not the only one, because I am currently reading a book titled Laura's Ghost: Women Speak About Twin Peaks. And this is written by Courtney Stallings, and it actually has a foreword by Cheryl Lee, who portrayed Laura. As I was saying, I have a lot more to say about Laura, and so I am potentially going to be saying that in a presentation that I'll be doing later this year. I want to talk a bit now about Jennifer Lynch's The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer. Jennifer, of course, as you probably can guess, is David Lynch's daughter. This is one of the hardest reads for me ever, but it captured so much of what so many girls and women experience. But this in particular, a girl, a child. Laura is a child. She was a child when she died, and she had been going through the most horrific thing you could imagine someone going through. And to dive deep into her head was painful, but I also found it cathartic. I don't want to say a lot about it here, because I hopefully will have a lot to say about it somewhere else. But I do want to read just a couple of things from her poetry. This has to do with knowing what's coming and feeling like your fate is decided for you and you have no other option. Inside me, there is something no one knows about, like a secret. Sometimes it takes over, and I drift back deep into darkness. This secret tells me I will never grow older, never laugh with friends, never be who I should if I ever reveal its name. If you know who and what she's talking about, just the pain there and that realization of trying to reach out and scream and no one being able to help you. Another aspect of Laura's pain is her belief that what has happened to her has caused her to become a horrible person. There's a passage in The Secret Diary where Laura writes, I think that the times that I have to go into the woods at night have poisoned me. And I just want to tell her it is not your fault. What has been done to you is not your fault. And I won't say much more about it now, except to say that I was molested as a child. So that feeling and that belief that I did something wrong in the same way that Laura feels, or she feels poisoned, she feels tainted by what has happened to her, that is a pain that I know all too well. It breaks my heart for myself and for all of the other children who experience that, and it breaks my heart for Laura. So I'm going to stop there because this is not a deep dive into Laura. I am doing that hopefully for a different project, but I will say that clearly, as I'm sure it's become obvious now, the course that has been making the most impact on me is my David Lynch course. I will continue with this David Lynch course, of course, and the Gothic Anthropocene. The Hamlet course, I mentioned after I talked about it with you all on this video, I feel inspired to get back to it and wrap it up. I should only have, a few more lessons and I will complete it. So I would say, for the most part, my personal curriculum for spring 2026 is working well. I would love to know if you have delved into this personal curriculum trend. If so, what are you studying? I would also love to hear any thoughts that you have about anything that I talked about in this video. I appreciate every one of you. Thank you so very much for watching. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, hit that bell so we can keep on talking about courses and books and all the other things that we're enjoying. Have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and happy reading.